the conflict that changed the world. The 7 Years' War is often described as the first truly global conflict. It was not simply a European struggle between monarchs and armies. It was a war that reached across continents, drew in rival empires, and changed the balance of power in ways that would shape the modern world. By the middle of the 18th century, Europe appeared stable on the surface. Earlier wars had ended with treaties, borders had been adjusted, and rulers spoke as if peace had been restored. But that sense of balance was fragile. Behind the scenes, tensions were building. Old rivalries had not disappeared, and new ones were becoming even more dangerous. The great powers were no longer competing only for land in Europe. They were now fighting for colonies, trade routes, resources, and naval dominance. Britain and France were engaged in a growing struggle for imperial control. Austria wanted to recover territory it had lost. Prussia, rising quickly under ambitious leadership, was determined to defend its new position among Europe's major powers. When war finally came, it did not begin out of nowhere. It was the result of years of unresolved anger and unfinished disputes. The War of the Austrian Succession had ended without solving the deeper problems between Europe's powers. One issue in particular continued to poison relations: Silesia. This wealthy and strategically important region had been taken by Prussia from Austria, and Austria never accepted the loss. For the Habsburg monarchy, recovering Silesia became a matter of pride, strategy, and revenge. At the same time, colonial tensions were becoming harder to control. British and French expansion overseas kept bringing their interests into collision, especially in North America and India. Agreements made in Europe meant little on distant frontiers. As trade networks and empires expanded, conflicts in one region could no longer stay isolated. The world was becoming too connected for that. A shock in European diplomacy. One of the most remarkable features of the 7 Years' War was the dramatic change in alliances that came just before it. For generations, France and Austria had been bitter enemies. Britain, meanwhile, had often supported Austria as a way to check French influence. But by the 1750s, priorities had shifted. Austria now saw Prussia as its greatest danger. Britain viewed France as its main rival overseas, especially in North America and India. As a result, old diplomatic patterns were overturned. Austria aligned with France and Russia, while Britain formed an alliance with Prussia. This sudden reversal became known as the Diplomatic Revolution. To many observers at the time, it was astonishing. It signaled that the old world of fixed dynastic rivalries was giving way to something broader. Wars were increasingly being driven not just by succession disputes, but by strategic interests and global competition. The spark came in 1756, when Frederick II of Prussia launched an attack on Saxony. That move set off a conflict that quickly spread through the new alliance system. Prussia's fight for survival. In Europe, the war became a desperate test for Prussia. Frederick the Great faced enemies on nearly every side. Austria threatened from the south, Russia from the east, France from the west, and Sweden from the north. Prussia was outnumbered and under immense pressure. What Prussia lacked in manpower, it tried to make up for in discipline, speed, and tactical skill. Frederick relied on rapid movement, aggressive maneuvers, and strict battlefield coordination to survive against larger coalitions. His army proved highly effective, and in 1757 he scored major victories at battles such as Rossbach and Leithen. These successes shocked Europe. Frederick's ability to defeat stronger opponents made him one of the most admired commanders of his age, and elevated Prussia's standing across the continent. But the victories did not end the danger. The war dragged on year after year, draining men, money, and supplies. Civilian populations suffered, towns were damaged, and entire regions were exhausted by constant military movement. Russia became one of Prussia's most dangerous enemies. Russian forces pushed deep into Prussian territory and at one point even occupied Berlin for a short time. Prussia seemed close to collapse. What saved Frederick was not simply battlefield brilliance, but a sudden political change in Russia. After the death of Empress Elizabeth, the new Russian leadership pulled back from the war. That unexpected shift gave Prussia breathing room and changed the course of the conflict. War in North America. While armies fought across Europe, another version of the war was unfolding in North America. There, the conflict had already begun before formal declarations were made in Europe. British and French colonists were competing for control of the Ohio Valley, a region of enormous strategic and economic importance. These tensions soon erupted into open fighting involving colonial militias, regular European troops, and Native American nations. For indigenous peoples, this was not just a European war carried into their lands. It was a struggle that directly affected their survival, independence, and regional influence. Different tribes chose different alliances based on their own interests. Many sided with the French, who were often seen as less threatening to native-held lands than British settlers. Others supported the British in hopes of gaining protection or advantage over rival nations. The result was a tangled and often tragic set of alliances that reshaped the political map of North America. A major turning point came in 1759, remembered by the British as a year of major victories. The capture of Quebec after the Battle of the Plains of Abraham dealt a devastating blow to French power in Canada. The fact that both commanding generals died in the battle only underscored the high human cost of imperial rivalry. After Quebec fell, French power in North America weakened rapidly. India and the struggle for commercial empire. The war in India looked different from the war in Europe, but its consequences were just as important. Here, the main struggle centered on trade, political influence, and alliances with local rulers rather than large-scale battles between European states alone. The British East India Company and French interests competed for power in key regions, using military force to defend commercial ambitions. One of the most decisive moments came at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Through a mix of military action, negotiation, and political betrayal, British forces secured control over Bengal, one of the wealthiest regions in India. That victory was far more than a local success. It weakened French influence and laid the groundwork for long-term British domination in India. What began as economic competition would eventually become imperial rule over vast territories and millions of people. The importance of sea power. If there was one force connecting every theater of the 7 Years' War, it was naval power. Control of the sea meant control of commerce, supply lines, troop movement, and access to colonies. Britain's navy gave it a major advantage in this wider imperial contest. With naval strength, Britain was able to blockade French ports, intercept reinforcements, and attack overseas possessions across the globe. French colonies became harder to defend, and distant outposts were left increasingly exposed. When Spain entered the war on France's side, the conflict widened even further. British forces captured major Spanish holdings, including Havana and Manila, showing just how global the struggle had become. By this point, it was clear that war would no longer be decided only by what happened on European battlefields. The ability to project force across oceans had become just as important as victories on land. Peace and the cost of victory. By 1763, the major powers were exhausted. The fighting had consumed enormous resources, and peace negotiations finally brought the war to an end. The Treaty of Paris reshaped the global map. France gave up Canada and large territories east of the Mississippi to Britain, effectively ending its dominance in mainland North America. In India, French influence was reduced to a limited presence. Britain emerged from the war as the leading global imperial power. Its empire had expanded dramatically, and its naval supremacy was clearer than ever. In Europe, the Treaty of Hubertusburg confirmed Prussia's hold over Silesia, securing its rise as a major power. Austria failed to recover the province it had fought so hard to reclaim, while Russia ended the conflict without major territorial reward. On paper, the map of Europe had not changed dramatically, but the balance of power had. The war had produced winners and losers on a global scale. Still, triumph came at a heavy price. Britain had won an enormous empire, but it had also accumulated massive debt. Governing and defending these new possessions would require money, soldiers, and administration. To deal with that burden, the British government turned increasingly toward its American colonies, raising taxes and tightening control. Those policies, intended to strengthen the empire, instead created anger and resistance. The road to revolution. The effects of the 7 Years' War did not end in 1763. In many ways, the peace settlement only set the stage for future upheaval. In North America, colonial resentment over taxation and political control would soon grow into open rebellion, leading to the American Revolution. France also suffered lasting consequences. The loss of overseas influence and the financial strain of war weakened the French monarchy. Over time, these pressures contributed to the crisis that would explode in the French Revolution. More broadly, the war changed how people understood conflict itself. It showed that war could no longer be confined to one region. Decisions made in European capitals could have devastating consequences in North America, India, the Caribbean, Africa, and beyond. The links between military power, global trade, and empire had become impossible to ignore. Why it still matters. Historians often call the 7 Years' War the first real world war, not because every nation on Earth took part, but because the conflict connected distant regions into one larger struggle. Events in Europe influenced battles in America and India. Naval actions in one ocean affected campaigns in another. The war revealed a world that was becoming increasingly interconnected. More than a contest between kings and dynasties, it was a turning point in the history of global power. It accelerated imperial expansion, helped create the conditions for major revolutions, and showed that modern warfare would be shaped by worldwide systems of trade, finance, and strategy. Its legacy can still be seen in the rise of empire, the fall of old political orders, and the birth of new nations. The 7 Years' War did not simply rearrange territory, it changed the structure of power across the world. If you want to learn more about the wars, strategies, and decisions that shaped the modern world, be sure to like this video and subscribe. Here, we explore war history, major battles, and the lessons we can still take from the past today.